You ever heard somebody say that it's not my fault, it's just the way I am, it's my hereditary, it's because I'm Italian, or it's just because our family has always been this way, or cancer runs in my family? Well, there's some research by Dr. Bruce Lipton that is challenging that. And what is so cool about this research is that it really corresponds with the Bible quite well, where in Proverbs 17:22 it says, "A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bone." So again, a merry spirit or merry heart does good. It's like medicine. That's pretty amazing. Dr. Bruce Lipton, he's a cell biologist, microbiologist. He says in his article, How Our Thoughts Control Our DNA, the common idea that DNA determines so much of who we are, not only our eye or hair color, for example, but also our addictions, disorders, or susceptibility to cancer, is a misconception. That's really important because we all know that our eye color is determined by our DNA. But what about those addictions and those disorders or the susceptibility to get cancer? We've heard for quite a while now that, again, that's just how it is for that guy because it runs in his family. That's how things are. Dr. Bruce Lipton wants to challenge that idea, and he suggests that it's actually our beliefs or our thoughts that are controlling our DNA. He says you find yourself to be more or less a victim of your hereditary. The problem with that belief is that it extends to another level. You become irresponsible. You say, I can't do anything about it, so why try? This concept says you are less powerful than your genes. A person's perception, or he also says in his lectures and his book, his belief is not the genetic programming, is what spurs all action in the body. It's actually our belief that select our genes, that select our behavior. The human body is comprised of 50 to 65 trillion cells. Cell functions independent of DNA, and its perceptions of environmental stimuli affect DNA. This also applies the same principles to the human body as a whole, showing the power our perceptions, that is, our beliefs, have over DNA. Again, this is pretty amazing stuff. If you want to check out more of this, I really encourage you to get his book, The Biology of Belief. It's definitely a good read. Now, to my knowledge, he's not a Christian, but he is a first-rate microbiologist, and so or cell biologist. I appreciate that. So he has his five-step explanation. The cell is like a human body, and it functions without DNA. The cell is like a human body. It is capable of respiration, digestion, reproduction, and other life functions. The nucleus, which contains the genes, has traditionally been viewed as the control center, the brain of the cell. Yet when the nucleus is removed, the cell continues with all of its life functions, and it can still recognize toxins and nutrients. It appears the nucleus and the DNA contains does not control the cell. That's really huge because, again, the standard mantra has been that the DNA inside the nucleus is the brain center. That's the control center of the cell. And he's saying, no, it's not. It's actually on the membrane of the cell because they're little receptors like antenna that are receiving signals from the environment. Where are those signals coming from? Well, they're coming ultimately from your brain. And your brain, of course, is getting it from your mind. And so what you think about a situation, whether it's objectively true, there really is a lion chasing you, or it's subjective, you just think there's a lion chasing you, it doesn't really matter. Because either way, whether it's real or perceived, your mind is telling your brain we're in big trouble. Your brain sends signals, whether they be electrical or chemical, to your body and to your cells, and then they take the appropriate action. Pretty incredible stuff. He says, yet when the nucleus is removed, the cell continues with all of its life functions, and it can still recognize toxins and nutrients. All right, scientists assumed some 50 years ago that genes control biology. It just seems so correct. We bought the story. We don't have the right assumptions. Part 2. DNA is controlled by the environment. Proteins carry out the functions in cells, and they are building blocks of life. It has long been thought that DNA controls or determines the actions of proteins. Here he proposes a different model. Environmental stimuli that come into contact with the cell membrane are perceived by receptor proteins in the membrane. This sets off a chain reaction of proteins passing on what could be described as messages to other proteins, motivating action in the cell. DNA is coated in a protective sleeve or protein. He says it's kind of like if my arm is the DNA, then there's a sleeve of protein, and that only gets pushed back when it has the right signal. And when it has that right signal, then it exposes the gene, and then the gene goes to work making new proteins, which could be the implementation of cancer, for example, or whatever the body believes that it actually needs, or whatever the cell believes it actually needs. Now, it doesn't mean that a cell is actually thinking, okay, but it is reacting based on certain stimuli, based on the beliefs that we have up here. Those stimuli are then sent down to the cell, and then they're translated into various actions. So what you think really does determine on what you become. It makes a huge difference. And again, it's so interesting. Think about how Jesus went to Nazareth, and it says he could not do many miracles there because of their unbelief. Pretty astounding things when you begin to understand that it's actually our beliefs that control our DNA and not the other way around. So he's proposed this other model, and he says DNA is coated in a protective sleeve of protein. The environmental signals act on that protein, causing it to open up and to select certain genes for use, genes specifically needed to react to the current environment. Basically, DNA is not the beginning of the chain reaction. Instead, the cell membrane's perception of the environment is the first step. If there are no perceptions, the DNA is inactive. Genes cannot turn themselves on or off. They can't control themselves. If a cell is cut off from any environmental stimuli, it doesn't do anything. Life is due to how the cell responds to the environment. 3. Perception of the environment is not necessarily the reality of the environment. In a 1988 study done by John Cairns, published by the journal Nature, titled The Origin of Mutants, he showed that mutations in DNA were not random, but happened in a predetermined way in response to environmental stresses. In every one of your cells, you have genes whose function it is to rewrite and adapt genes as necessary. In a chart illustrating Cairns' findings in the journal, environmental signals were shown to be separate from the organism's perception of environmental signals. A being's perception of the environment acts as a filter between the reality of the environment and the biological reaction to it. Perception rewrites genes. That's huge. Your perception, what you think about something. Again, whether it's objectively true or it's subjectively true, it doesn't matter. There is a lion chasing you, or you only think there's a lion chasing you. It doesn't really matter what the reality is, but if that's what you think, then that is what will control your genes. And then your genes will then, of course, rewrite or create new proteins. Human beliefs choosing to perceive a positive or negative environment. Just as a cell has receptor proteins to receive the environment outside the cell membrane, humans have the 5 senses. These are what help a person determine which genes need to be activated for a given situation. The genes are like programs on a computer disk. These programs can be divided into 2 classes. The first relates to growth or reproduction. The second relates to protection. When a cell encounters nutrients, the growth genes are activated and used. When a cell encounters toxins, the protection genes are activated and used. When a human being encounters love, the growth genes are activated. When a human being encounters fear, the protection genes are activated. That's pretty significant. So again, Jesus said, don't worry about your life. Don't worry about what you'll put on, what you'll eat, etc. Because God knows you need all those things. He'll take care of you. And he said, which of you by worrying can add 1 cubit to your span of life? Well, of course, nobody. Worrying doesn't help. Even though we love to, we're quite good at it. We're masters at worrying, but it doesn't help. And he said, don't worry. I believe this is why Jesus kept telling us not to worry. I kind of wish he had couched in all these really cool biological terms, but in his wisdom, he decided not to. The fun part is that we now get to discover some of these things and say, oh, that's what he was talking about. That's why he was saying that. He didn't explain it because, people probably wouldn't have cared or would not have had a clue what he was talking about. He just told us what is actually necessary. So we've sort of been doing it on a blind faith, so to speak. But now it's fun that we get to actually discover, oh, that's why we shouldn't worry. Because what we're doing is we're telling our body, hey, if I'm nervous, I'm worried, what am I telling my body? Times are bad, fear, panic, and I'm telling my body, look out, bad stuff's on the way, and it sends those toxins, and then the protection genes are going to be activated and used. Whereas when I'm in a trusting, loving environment, I'm going to have growth genes are going to be activated and used. And of course, which do I want? I want the growth genes to be activated and used. You can see it on a person. You know, some people they get to be 70 and 80 and they still look like they're, 40 or 50. Some people get to be 50 and 60 and they look like they're 102. Why is that? I believe it's because of how we go through our life. Of course, we can put in different chemicals to our bodies. You know, if you destroy your body through the use of harmful chemicals, through illicit drugs, way too much alcohol, etc., then you can certainly take out the life force of your body. But also, it can come through just being a worrywart, is having way too much on your mind and creating the the uh, the damage to your body. So a person may perceive a negative environment when there is actually a supportive or positive environment. When this negative perception activates the protection genes, the body's response is the programmed fight or flight. And then 5, fight or flight. Blood flow is directed away from the vital organs to the limbs, which are used for fighting and running. The immune system becomes of lesser importance. If you picture the responses we once needed for running from a lion, for example, the legs would have been infinitely more important than that immediate situation than the immune system. Thus, the body favors the legs and neglects the immune system. So when a person perceives a negative environment, the body tends to neglect the immune system and vital organs. Stress also makes us less intelligent, less clear-minded. Now that's interesting. So when you've studied for that test, you know the answers. You get there and you're like, whoa, I can't think. What happened? It's because of that stress. It's actually taking blood away from the frontal cortex, and it's sending it to the legs and to the arms, so that you really are dumber on that test day. That's why it's so important to stay calm when you take a test, right? Easier said than done, right? I know, I've been there, but this is the reason why we actually need to stay calm when we're taking a test. So when a person perceives a negative environment, the body tends to neglect the immune system and vital organs. Stress also makes us less intelligent, less clear-minded. The part of the brain needs related to reflexes is given more prominence in fight or flight mode than the part related to memory and other mental functions. When a person perceives a loving environment, the body activates growth genes and nurtures the body. For example, in Eastern European orphanages where children are given lots of nutrients but little love, these types of institutions have found to have stunted development in terms of height, learning, and other areas. Of course, this happened rather infamously in Romania under Ceausescu, where there were a lot of orphans. They were provided for physically, but they did not receive the love and attention they needed, and that, of course, stunted their growth. There's also high incidence of autism. Autism, in this case, is a symptom of protection genes being activated, like walls being put up. Beliefs act as a filter between the real environment and your biology. Thus, people have the power to change their biology. It is important to keep a clear perception because otherwise, you won't develop the right things biologically for the real environment around you. You are not the victim of your genes. What beliefs are you choosing for your genes to be expressed? So, good question. So, in biblical terms, God tells us, don't be afraid, don't fear, be courageous, be strong, be valiant, don't worry, have faith, right? All these exhortations that we find in Scripture telling us that it's going to be okay. God is for you. He's not against you. He's thinking about you. He cares about you. And so, really, we should find ourselves as believers in just this quiet, calm state of peace, knowing that we're actually trusting the Lord because He is our loving Father. Unfortunately, for probably most of us, we find ourselves panicked, worried, stressed, saying, "Oh my goodness, what is God going to do? He's not going to do anything. Oh no," right? And you start getting those butterflies in your stomach, right? And then they persist, and then your body actually gets addicted to those. Your cells saying, "Hey, you know, I made space in my receptor cells for you. Where's the chemical that you've been feeding me? I would like some more of that." And when you don't send it, it says, hey, I need to feel this way. And then you start thinking, I actually need to feel this way. That's called an addiction. It's the same thing when you start binging on Facebook or the internet or video games or TV or whatever you use as a distraction. Your body gets used to that and it starts saying, hey, I like this. And that's when you we need to be careful. So follow Jesus' advice. Don't worry. Don't stress. Believe. Trust. He knows what you need. The Father knows what you need. He knows before you ask. He loves you. He cares about you. And He's going to take care of you. Take care.